I was thrown out of my home because my sister fabricated a story about me dealing drugs. My parents believed her without a shred of evidence. Growing up, my family placed immense importance on appearances and achievements. My father, Robert, 58, worked at a well-regarded law firm and was highly respected in our community. My mother, Sarah, 55, was a dedicated history professor and the quintessential nurturing mother, always present for us. However, everything in our family came with conditions. We had to present ourselves and behave impeccably, and perfection was defined by how well we met my parents' expectations. My older sister, Mia, 29, or Mimi as everyone called her, was the embodiment of their dreams. She was an accomplished architect, for years my senior, and seemed to navigate life effortlessly, constantly receiving praise, accolades, and admiration from our parents. In contrast, I was quieter, more introverted, and a bit rebellious. I was intelligent, but I chose to carve my own path. My interests didn't always align with my parents' vision of success. I was pursuing a degree in literature, which they didn't appreciate, but they tolerated our disagreements as long as I stayed within their boundaries. Despite our differences, I admired Mimi. She was everything our parents wanted, and I viewed her as someone I could rely on and learn from. I never imagined she would betray me like this. 6 years ago, my life was turned upside down due to Mimi's colossal deception. I was 19, still in college, trying to figure out my future while Mimi, our parents' favorite, was the golden child, accomplished, responsible, and always in their good graces. I often felt like I could never measure up, perpetually living in her shadow. Things took a drastic turn for Mimi a few months before she spun her web of lies. She came to me, pleading for help to cover up a precarious situation she had gotten herself into. Essentially, she had made some poor choices and wanted me to keep quiet about them. She was involved with some dubious characters and situations that made me uneasy, and I didn't want to be part of her schemes. She asked me to lie to our parents and provide her with an alibi, claiming it was a family duty and that I owed her for always supporting me. However, something felt off, and I was reluctant to get entangled in her plans. I was trying to keep my own life on track, and lying for her seemed like a recipe for disaster. I told her I wouldn't do it, as I didn't want to take any risks. Her reaction was explosive, as if my refusal was a monumental betrayal. I remember her warning me that if I crossed her, I would regret it, and that she would find a way to make me pay. At the time, I thought it was just theatrics and that she would calm down. Looking back, that moment seemed to be the catalyst for everything that followed. Within weeks, Mimi began to subtly undermine me. Soon after, she told our parents a massive lie. She claimed I was selling drugs in college. This was a horrific falsehood that left me reeling. I had never touched drugs, let alone sold them, but Mimi was so convincing that my parents believed her without question. To this day, I can't comprehend why she did it. We weren't particularly close, but we weren't enemies either. She was my sister, and I could never have imagined she would do something so malicious. This was a lie that could ruin my future, and I genuinely believed it did. My father, Robert, reacted like a storm. He didn't ask questions or allow me to explain. His fury hit me harder than I could have anticipated. I felt his despair and disgust, as if I were no longer his daughter. My mother, Sarah, was silent, but her silence was just as painful. She looked at me with profound disappointment, as if I had shattered all her expectations. Meanwhile, Mimi stood off to the side, expressionless. She didn't say a word or acknowledge the chaos she had caused. She simply watched as my parents kicked me out. That day, I was thrown out of the house with no chance to explain or understand what was happening. I left with nothing and had to drop out of college since I couldn't afford it without their support. My future felt like it had vanished overnight. For the next few months, I bounced around, living with friends, moving from couch to couch, and taking any job I could find. I felt utterly hopeless. I had big dreams, and everything I had worked for was just gone. I tried reaching out to my parents, hoping they would see the truth. Every call ended with me being shut down. My father would hang up before I could say anything, and my mother would simply repeat her disparaging remarks, refusing to listen or consider my side. I kept hoping they would see through Mimi's lies and remember who I was, struggling to move forward after they abandoned me. They missed my graduation, my first job, and nearly every significant moment in my life. Now, with my mother ill, they acted as if those 6 years of silence and hurt didn't matter, as if I could simply forgive and forget. It felt so unjust. I may sound selfish, but this caught me off guard, and I didn't feel good about it. They weren't there during my darkest times, yet now they wanted to be part of my happiest moments. A rush of emotions overwhelmed me. I felt guilty thinking about my mother being unwell. Despite everything, she was still my mother, and the thought of her suffering was hard to bear. I realized that her desire to see me might not just be about the wedding, it could be about seeking closure or making peace before it was too late. But forgiving them felt impossible after all they had put me through: abandonment, disbelief, and the struggles I faced alone. How could I let them back into my life as if nothing had happened? Following the text from my father, I received several more messages from relatives I didn't even know existed. They said it was terrible of me not to include my parents in my wedding and that whatever had happened in the past should be overlooked in light of everything they had done for me throughout my life. This really got under my skin. It was amusing how they came out of the woodwork when I didn't invite my parents to my wedding but were nowhere to be found when I was nearly homeless. I shared this with my fiancé, Alex, and he immediately told me to ignore my relatives' messages because they were irrelevant. He assured me that he would support whatever decision I made, but he also reminded me that my wedding day should be about us, about our happiness and enjoyment, not about the past and the unresolved feelings that came with it. He encouraged me to think about what would make me happy in the long run, not just in the moment. I kept wondering if pushing them away now would only lead to more pain, or if allowing them back in would make everything worse for me. I felt conflicted. I had worked hard to forge my own path and build a life without them. Part of me wanted to protect what I had created, fearing that letting them back in would ruin everything. But another part of me felt guilty, especially with my mother's health in question. I couldn't deny that she was trying to reach out now, even if it felt like it was too late. I kept thinking that involving them in the wedding might allow me to finally move on and leave the past behind. But then I remembered that they had abandoned me based solely on Nini's words: no proof, no evidence. I wasn't sure if I could just forget the last 6 years. My wedding was just a few months away, and I was incredibly confused. Should I leave things as they were, or let them back in? To be honest, I wasn't even sure if I wanted them back in my life, so I needed some advice on whether I should allow my parents back in after they believed my sister's lies and abandoned me. Update: it's been a few weeks since I posted. I read through some comments and was relieved that most people felt I wasn't being unreasonable. Still, I felt trapped in a whirlwind. I was anxious after hearing from my father about my mother's illness and his desire to see me. I considered blocking their numbers, but I was also worried that if I didn't give them a chance, I might regret it. Then, unexpectedly, Nini reached out. I received a text from her saying she had heard about my upcoming wedding. She mentioned that she knew Mom was sick and wanted to make things right before it was too late. It felt like everything had shifted in an instant. Nini, the one who had caused me so much pain, was now talking about family and healing. She expressed her longing for me and emphasized the importance of our family coming together. She claimed I had always been a part of her life and that she wanted us to find peace. But all I could think about was her betrayal, which had shattered everything. My father's message had already unsettled me, and Nini's text only added to my confusion. What did she expect from me? Did she really think I could forgive her with just a few kind words? She hadn't apologized or acknowledged the pain she had caused. Instead, she kept stressing how family was the most important thing, especially with Mom's health declining. It all felt insincere, as if she was only reaching out now to alleviate her own guilt. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was another motive behind her message, one that I wasn't seeing. She had been cold and calculating when she lied about me, and I couldn't shake the impression that it was all about her image. The thought of seeing Mimi after all these years felt like reopening an old wound. Still, the fact that my mother to be there for her, to support her in her time of need. I hope she understood, but her response was just another message about family, devoid of any acknowledgement of her past actions. She even had the audacity to say she understood my feelings but hoped I would see the bigger picture and let the past go for my mother's sake. After her message, I was more confused than ever. I thought that taking time to process my emotions would help, but it only made things worse. Relatives I hadn't heard from in years began reaching out, urging me to let go of my anger and warning me that if I didn't reunite with my family soon, I would regret it. They seemed to know only a fraction of the story and believed I was being unfair. Their words stung, but I realized they had no idea what I had endured. This only fueled my frustration. A few days later, my father sent me another message with updates about my mother's condition. He didn't provide much detail, but it was clear she wasn't doing well. He said Mom had always loved me and wanted us to be a family again. It felt strange, as if he was trying to make me feel guilty rather than apologizing or acknowledging my pain. I questioned whether he understood the consequences of their actions. I spent hours contemplating what I would say if I met them again. I imagined telling them about the years of struggle, the nights spent feeling utterly alone, and the betrayal I still felt. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't change anything. They would likely find a way to excuse their actions or dismiss my feelings, claiming I was exaggerating. Still, the thought of my mother being ill weighed heavily on me. Was I wrong to hold on to my anger when she could be facing serious consequences? Alex, my fiancé, has been an incredible source of support, reminding me that my feelings are valid and that I can set my own boundaries. He promised to stand by me, no matter what I decided. I felt fortunate to have someone who truly understood my pain and didn't pressure me to forgive just for the sake of appearances. He emphasized that the decision was mine, but I could feel the weight of it all as the wedding date approached. The pressure was mounting. I was torn between wanting to let my parents and Mimi back into my life for some semblance of peace and protecting myself from further hurt. My mother's condition complicated matters even more. I worried that if I didn't let them back in now, I would regret it later. Yet, I was concerned that opening the door would lead to even more heartache. Mimi's message kept replaying in my mind, making me question whether I was being too harsh. But then I remembered that she never expressed regret or acknowledged the harm she caused. How could I move forward when the past still felt so fresh? I was left wondering if forgiving them would genuinely help me heal or simply reopen old wounds. My wedding should be a joyful occasion, but it was currently overshadowed by unresolved feelings. I was at a crossroads, unsure if bringing them back into my life would provide closure or just more pain. Update: it's been about 3 weeks since my last post. A few days after my previous update, I reached my breaking point and decided to visit my family. After weeks of putting it off, I couldn't ignore my mother's critical illness. Part of me wanted to keep my distance, but guilt gnawed at me, and I knew I would regret not seeing her one last time if she didn't improve. The drive to their house took an hour, and it was difficult to remain calm. I kept telling myself I was doing this for my mother, not for Dad or Mimi, but that didn't make it any easier. I was anxious about returning to the house, filled with memories from my childhood. I had lived there my entire life until 6 years ago when I was forced to leave, and now I felt compelled to return. When I arrived, everything seemed almost the same, but it felt odd. To my surprise, my mother was the only one there, seated in a chair by the window. I barely recognized her. My father hadn't arrived yet, which was somewhat of a relief, but I knew the confrontation was still looming. It broke my heart to see her so weak and fatigued. She looked so small, and all I wanted to do was hug her and cry. I couldn't help but think about how much time had been lost. We could have shared so many moments together if Mimi hadn't pulled that stunt. I wouldn't have been as shocked by my mother's condition if I had been by her side all those years. My older sister had denied me that opportunity. Mom looked both happy and sad to see me. For the first time, I didn't see her as the authoritative figure I had tried so hard to impress. She was just a mother, a human who had made mistakes. She sincerely apologized, clearly expressing her regret to be by her side. When my father walked in, the atmosphere shifted immediately. He entered with an air of confidence, as if he had done nothing wrong. He didn't apologize or acknowledge the pain he had caused me. Instead, he dismissed my feelings as insignificant, advising me to move on for the sake of the family. It was as if he believed he was the victim because I had distanced myself for so long. He completely missed my mother's perspective. I tried to remain calm, but rage bubbled within me as I expressed how hurt I was by everything that had happened and how I had managed to survive over the last 6 years. He brushed it off with phrases like, "Oh, we thought we were doing what was best for the family." He refused to accept responsibility for his actions and kept shifting the focus, making it seem as if I was to blame for not reaching out to them over the years. My mother looked concerned but remained silent, perhaps tired of Dad and our never-ending disputes. My father persisted in trying to convince me that my decision to stay away was wrong. It was frustrating, and I felt that familiar sense of powerlessness from my childhood, as if my voice didn't matter. When I asked about Mimi and where she was, they replied that she couldn't make it. It was strange because she had reached out, mentioning family and forgiveness, but when it came time to confront the issue, she was absent. Deep down, I wasn't surprised. I assumed she would avoid any serious confrontation, even though she was the one who had instigated it. She had caused the chaos and left everyone else to deal with it. After the visit, I felt exhausted. Instead of the tranquility I had hoped for, I sat silently as my father lectured me, hoping he could persuade me to forgive them. However, I understood that I didn't need his approval and didn't have to fit into a family that had let me down so easily before. Before I left, my mother asked me to return soon. She sounded desperate and appeared sorrowful. I wasn't sure if I would be back, but I couldn't say goodbye forever. I hugged her and promised to keep in touch, encouraging her to reach out whenever she wanted or needed to. The drive back to my place was a blur. I felt conflicted. My mother's apology was genuine and meant more to me than I realized, but my father's attitude in Mimi's absence made me bitter, bringing back the pain I had tried to ignore. I wanted to forgive them and move on, but I wasn't sure how to do that without losing my mind. I had forgiven my mom, I held no resentment toward her anymore, but what about Dad and Mimi? I was uncertain about them. My wedding was in a month, and I didn't know whether to invite them or keep them out of my life. I was confident I would stay in touch with my mother. I might invite her. However, as I said, I was unsure about Dad and Mimi. Perhaps it was best to keep my distance for my own peace of mind. It was difficult, especially since my mother might not have much time left. I felt a mix of remorse, hatred, and love, and I wasn't sure if I would ever find the closure I desired. I honestly didn't know what my next step would be. I promised to keep everyone updated if anything changed. Update: hello, everyone. It has been a long time since I provided an update. 6 months have passed, and so much has happened. I would have shared an update sooner, but I wanted to process everything. Alex and I had a small, private wedding after everything with my family. We wanted a quiet day focused on us. I decided to invite my mother because she was quite ill, and I knew I would regret it if she couldn't attend. It was easy to invite her because she had made an effort with me, and everything felt genuine. She admitted her mistakes, and I could tell she truly wished things had been different. I chose not to invite Mimi. It wasn't to hurt her, I just couldn't trust her not to cause more turmoil. After the ceremony, she texted me, furious about not being included. I simply told her I didn't want her there and blocked her number. That felt like a relief, as if I had closed a difficult chapter. Unfortunately, about 2 months after the wedding, my mother passed away. She wasn't in pain, she died peacefully with me and my father by her side. I was grateful for the time I spent with her, even though it was brief. In her final days, she seemed softer and more like the mother I had known. We would sometimes sit in silence, which felt comforting. I was able to say goodbye, something I will always cherish. My mother's funeral was one of the hardest days of my life. It was a simple gathering of family and a few close friends.